Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are using this cute little spring wreath and then the spring birds, and is it just a nest? Lovely Layers nest? Yep, that's what it is. And then the sentiment is from You're a Keeper? Is it You're a Keeper? It is You're a Keeper. You would think that I would know the product names, but sometimes I know some of them, but not all of them. Anywho, so when this spring set came out, for the birds and the nest, they were gone super quick. So I never got a chance to use them. And so I just kind of wanted to revisit them for a summer card. Obviously, you can have birds anytime. And I thought that they would be really, really cute, kind of nestled into this little floral wreath. But it's tricky, right? Because one of them's a stamp and one of them's a die. And so sometimes they can look like maybe they don't go, especially if you're stamping with a black outline like I am. And so I just wanted to share some kind of tips and tricks that I use to get them to blend seamlessly into a focal point. So I've done my stamping and I used the Intense Black ink from Honeybee, which is safe for Copics. I'm going to be doing all of my shading on my dies as well as my stamps with alcohol markers today. And I'm using the little robin. Very cute. Very, very cute. There's 5 pieces for this one. It's like full body with its legs, its chest, and then its little wing and its face, and then there's also 3 for the nest. So I'm doing all of them, cutting it all out of white cardstock. Again, you certainly could use colored cardstock to do this. I just like the way that it looks when I get to color it. Plus I like coloring. I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I don't. So I'm just going to tape these down, and I am cutting this out of Nina 80-pound solar white cardstock because I find that I like that best for my coloring. And then I did cut out 2 of those little branches from the nest, but I didn't end up using them. And I cut out 2 little birdies just in case one went awry. And here's what I found out. So you guys know that typically I do a lot of Googling before I do my coloring just because I want to make sure it's accurate. And what I discovered was I don't really like robin colors. That's what I discovered. But I knew that that's the color my robin should be. And so I was took some creative license with it. I made it a little more corally instead of rust colored, which is what they typically are. But I still think that it comes across as a robin, and I'm fine with it. From that, I knew that I was going to have that like corally orange color. So then picking my other colors, I tried to stick with a lot of like bright summer colors. And so I went with a yellow green. I went with a kind of middle of the road pink, and then more of like a true blue. That was to match my background. If you are not familiar with Bobby Lemansky, she is Bobby Hart Designs. I'm sure you've heard me talk about her before. She's on the design team for Honeybee. She does not do videos. However, she is crazy talented, like so good, so good. And so back when this set first came out, she had done a video, or I'm sorry, she had done a card where she used like the little speckled egg kind of look in the background of her card, and I totally loved it. And so I wanted to recreate that for this here, and I think it's really, really fun. But I think that it's important to give credit to where you get inspiration from, and that is where my inspiration is from. So I just wanted to say that. If you don't follow her on Instagram or her blog, I would highly recommend you do that, because that lady is pumping out fantastic, creative, just amazing designs all the time. So yeah, there's that. For the wreath, I stuck with all the same greens. Normally I like to break up my greens, but because I knew I was going to have so many other things going on, I didn't really think that it was necessary to do more than one green. And so I kept it just really kind of like bright and summery with a yellow green. We're going to add shading any point where 2 places meet or where one object lays on top of the other. So where the leaves are tucked behind the flowers, there's definitely going to be more shading. And then because of the way the leaves are drawn, the way the illustrator drew them, there's like a line in the center, and I took that as my cue to add a little bit of darkness there as well. But I didn't really extend it out because I wanted that yellow green, the YG03 to really be the predominant color. And the other two were just for, shading and shadows. So I'm not going to color this whole thing because I think you get it by now. And then we're going to move on to the florals. So I went with a little bit of a lighter yellow than I normally do, because normally my yellow is like almost a gold or a mustard color. And so I really wanted these to just kind of be light and bright. And so I kept my usual Y08, but I went a lighter. So I went a Y02 and a Y00. And then for the larger flowers, the centers have a bunch of little dots in them. And so that's exactly how I applied my color. I just dotted it right in there, and however it came out, and I was totally happy with that. For this, instead of going with a B26, which would be the next color in that succession, which is a pretty color, I went with a 66, which is just a hair more on the purple side, a little bit more on the blue-violet side. And that was just to kind of break it up because I know my background's going to be blue. And I wanted there to be some matchy-matchy there, but not so matchy-matchy that my flowers blended into my background. I hope that makes sense. I really think that this is a very cute card. So, we're just going to go through and do the coloring, and then we'll start talking about the ways to make them come together, or the decisions that I made to make them, I think, become more of a focal point. The one thing that I did not do that you definitely could do is you could stamp your stamp in a no-line ink, and that would give it the no outline look that the dies have. But because I like a bold black outline, I chose to still stamp them in black and show you how to make it work that way. So just, that's just something to consider. If you really want them to blend in, that would be, stamping them in a no-line ink. So when I talked to you guys last, I had told you that I had a dermatologist appointment because I had a spot on the bridge of my nose that I was concerned about after being diagnosed with skin cancer last year. And so I went, even though I had so much anxiety about it, for real. And I didn't even realize how much until I went, and then they told me it was sunspots. So no cancer, just sunspots. Thank God. Nothing they have to cut out of my face. And I didn't even realize how much I was stressing about it until she told me it's nothing to worry about. And then I started crying on her table. And immediately thanking God, because very, very grateful, just so grateful that's not something that we're going to have to do again. So that's that. I'm just getting older. I am not having to go in through the surgeries again for the cancer. And so, I'll take getting older. Good with that. Totally. And she's like, oh, you could do lasers, or you could do this. It's all cosmetic. And I was like, lady, I don't care. Literally, as long as it's not going to be something that kills me, it can stay. Not that I judge anybody who decides to change it, but I've had freckles my whole life. And so literally they'll just blend into the rest of my face. So now that this coloring is done, we are going to move on to the coloring of the dies. These lovely layers are, you guys know that I'm a big fan of them, even though I don't really like dies. These, just because they come together so nicely and they look so good colored. I just can't get over it. For a long time, I wouldn't even do it because I was like, dies, meh. But then I tried it, and it turns out I dig the lovely layers. So there's that. These are the little beaks. I'm coloring them with the darkest orange. And then this is the face and chest area, which for the robins is, like I said, oftentimes they're more rust colored. In some of the birds, the whole chest is this reddish orange color. And in some of them, they are white with a reddish orange. Just to keep the color interesting, I chose to do the white. So I'm going to be shading the white with some warm grays. But first, I wanted to, this is like two separate pieces. So I wanted to kind of extend that orange down a little bit so it blended into the white like you would see in nature. And so I just chose a lighter yellow, a yellow orange to do that. And that was Y00. No, YR00. Yes. Yeah, that's right. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I do with the flowers. I'm going to use this little wing to hold it in place so that I can see where to add my shadows for my white. Because when you're coloring an object white, you're really just adding the shadows. So I need some shadows coming out from this wing. And then also with all of the lovely layers, there is embossed detail when the die is cut. And so I'm just following along those little, I guess, feather areas that are embossed in there to where I add my shading. The last thing that I'm going to do to make this kind of come together is I'm going to go in with a colorless blender. So that way I can go right over that orange and that white area to help them kind of blend into the white. And then so far, this is how the body is looking. I do like to go through as I'm coloring them and check to make sure that they're lining up and that the shadows are making sense. For the actual robin's body, most of these are brown, like very, very brown. But this is one of the color choices that I made in order to tie my black outline in and make my focal point look cohesive. So that is to color the majority of the bird's feathers black. And that's going to attach itself to that black stamping, and it's going to make them look like they go together. So I did cover this little birdie's feet orange and his legs gray, and then just kind of blended them into each other. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the shading to my little birdie. I did add some shading down his back. This is not necessary, but for me, it helps to have the visual, and then that edge is nicely colored for when I put my wing on top. If there's any gapping, or like if you're looking at it from the side, you won't be able to tell that they're two pieces. So the reason I chose, like I said, to go with the black was to tie into the black stamping. But I'm going to do a little bit of color glazing because I don't want the bird to look inaccurate. I still want it to have some warm tones to it, but I did want it to be dark enough that it resonated as some black. And so once I got the coloring done, I'm going to go over it and just kind of wash it with a warmer brown. Here I'm just coloring in that wing area. So again, when it's put on one on top of the other, same thing with this light gray. When they're put on top of each other, it's not going to look like they're multiple pieces. So here's how we're at so far. And again, just setting them on top of each other so that I can double check. And then I'm going to move on to the wing. For the wing, I started with the black, and again, I'm following that embossed detail that's put in with the die. And I'm just kind of doing short little strokes from where the feathers would be, and this is going to give it a much more realistic look than just coloring it flatly or just like a line of black. So I'm doing a bunch of little flicks, and I'm going to go all the way out from that black 100 into the C5, which is my lightest color. And again, you can see just doing short little flicks to get them all blended in with each other. And then like this would be a perfectly acceptable black wing. Like if you were, coloring a black bird, that would be totally acceptable to color it black. But because I do want that little bit of warmth, here's the browns I'm using for the nest. I'm going to take that middle brown, that E57, and I'm just going to go right over my blacks. So the black will still be black, but the other colors, the grays, will have a hint of brown to them, so that my robin will still be accurate, but that black will still be present to tie into my stamping. And once again, me just double and triple checking that everything lines up, and I am going to be happy with the way that it looks. So from there, we're going to go on to the nest. For the nest, I colored them all the same with the same brown colors, using that same trick where you put one layer on top of the other to find where the shadow areas need to be and then just outline them. So yeah, anywho, with my sunspots, I chose not to do the laser, mostly because they're very expensive. But also, I mean, I have had freckles my whole life. It doesn't really matter to me. And then she told me to start using a retinol because obviously, like, fine lines, aging, all that. I'm getting older. But also, she said that it can help with precancerous skin cells. So anything that I can do to prevent having to go through that again, I am down for. So I did pick up a retinol while I was there. There, the very top piece has some cutouts on it, so then that would cast a shadow onto the second layer, and so that's what you saw me doing there, just with my lightest color marking those shadow spots, and that's where I will add my shadows to when we get to that layer, which will be just here in a second. This is the inside. There's little, if you're not familiar with the Lovely Layers nest, there's little eggs that get tucked in there, which I left out, but you totally could, and they would be adorable. So again, checking. You don't always have to do this, but I can't stop myself. But so now here for these little lighter or darker areas that I've already marked, I'm going in with my darkest color and then just going right over those because I know that those areas will need shadows. For the actual shading of the nest, this is like the easiest coloring, guys, I swear. You're just going to do little like lines, little flick swipes of color. And this is going to create a ton of texture in your nest. So I started with my darkest color. If you're very heavy-handed, like I was super heavy-handed when I first started Copa coloring. But if you are very heavy-handed, then you can start with your lightest color. And then just go through out to your darkest, and then I'd give it maybe a once over with your lightest. But since I started with my darkest, I'm going to go to my mid-tone, doing the same thing, the swipes and flicks, and then with my lightest color, I will fill everything in. That will also help to blend all of the colors so that they look very nice together. Don't mind my random pauses. I was coloring while I was multitasking, and then so sometimes I got distracted from my coloring. This is the only part that it is on. I did double check. So just this nest part. And then for this last one, the only thing I did different is because it does have some branches that hang out, I picked one side or the other, whether it was like the top or the bottom. And then for those particular branches, I added shadows to the same side. So, just if it was under, I added shadows under all those branches that were facing that way. But for the main body of it, I again did the little swipey, flicking little lines of color. And don't be afraid of this. I know that it looks kind of haphazard because it is haphazard. Because when you layer them all together, it's going to look like a nest, and it's ultimately not really going to matter as long as you are going in the same direction. You don't want to go different directions. You want to just be continually going in the same direction, and that's why you see me, rotating my paper so that they're always going in that same, what is that? I'm going counterclockwise, I guess. So then that way, if you're always going in the same direction, they will mesh, they will meld, and if by some chance you feel like it still does not look the way you want it to look, go over it with your lightest color and it will help blend them. So don't hold yourself, to too high of a standard when it comes to the flicking and the swiping, because honestly, it's going to look pretty in the end regardless. Now we're going to start building these bad boys. Basically, I just went through with my honeybee glue in some of the cases for like the eye, which I did color black, by the way. Sorry, I didn't show you that. If you lose the eye, just use a black pearl. Like, honestly, don't stress about it. But so I'm just going through and just layering these up the way that they're supposed to go. If you need them, Honeybee always has their Lovely Layers, always have a layering guide that if you go to the website, you can download the PDF so that you can see how they're supposed to go together. Super helpful. And then I'm going to use my crystal katana to pick up my little eyeball and push that back into place. And then the same thing with the beak. So helpful. You guys, I mean, I went without this for forever. I never bought anything, but really, very helpful. Not just for applying rhinestones, but also little teeny tiny die cuts. Here I'm going around the edge with my lightest color, again, just to make sure that when everything layers up, you don't see any of that white from the side, since I do cut mine out of white cardstock and color them. And then I'm just going to layer these bad boys up, and then we're going to move on to the background. So I told you about my doctor's appointment. Very, very grateful and thankful that that didn't turn out to be more of a issue. And then what else did we talk about? I think that was the only thing I needed to update you on, honestly. So if you notice when I was doing my coloring that these aren't my usual colors, you are correct. And it's funny because that RV 2329, what was the other one? 25 combination. Those are some of the first Copic markers I ever bought. Did you know that? And I never use them anymore because I found the zeros and I like those so much better. But yeah, so it's funny. Don't feel like you have to be married to the ones that you don't necessarily, that you start with. But that's also why I recommend what I recommend when people ask me like, oh, what Copic colors do you recommend? Like, I like a brighter marker, so those are the ones that I recommend. And I would recommend that if you're looking for different Copic markers, that you find a creator that uses a color palette that you love, because maybe mine isn't for you. So here for this is my little speckled background, which I totally dig. I used ground espresso and spattered that onto the background. This is it Periwinkle? I think it is. I think it's Periwinkle from Hero Arts. And so it's a good solid cardstock. So I did spatter on that ground espresso, and now I'm putting down some perfect pearls. And then I'm going in with some white acrylic paint to get that like egg spatter look. Now, I know that realistically this should be more of a teal blue than a blue, but I wanted a blue, and it's my card, so I do what I want. And I think it ended up coming out super cute anyway. For this, I am using our Brilliant White Pigment ink to stamp down my sentiment on some black cardstock, and then I am going to white heat emboss that, and then cut it out with its coordinating die, as well as cut out my wreath from my coordinating dies. And the wreath, actually, if you are not familiar with this set, there's another one that's like that too. We actually have an inside and an outside die, which is brilliant. So you can cut out the wreath with the inside intact, or you can cut them out like I am going to as a full wreath. So you'll have no middle. And then I just like to hold my larger die in place while I put the center in, and then they share pieces of tape so that I know they're not going to shift or move or anything, because I've taped them together as like now one continuous piece. And then that little extra piece. So now here is my speckled egg background. And I felt like the card needed a little bit of something, and this is something that you can totally do if you feel like your card needs a little bit of help. I am going to cut this out, and this is using the decal edge rectangles. I thought that was kind of fun, and it mimicked the nest, that it wasn't perfect. But you could totally use like a stitch die or anything like that. And I'm just going to stack it on top of another piece of that periwinkle, just to give it just a little extra something, that little design edge. So here you see me going through and I'm coloring the outline of my stamp. This is the next thing that you can do to help your stamping blend in seamlessly with your die cuts, because by coloring in that white edge as the same color as your background, you give it almost a no line look. Because then you only see the coloring. You don't see that white die cut, just the wreath is what you see. And so I definitely recommend doing that if you're trying to blend some dies that have no lines, of course, because they're not stamped images, with a black outline stamp. So here I'm just getting everything lined up. I'm going to tuck in my nest behind my stamping, which will again help them to look like they belong together. And then there's those stems that are those sticks I colored that I didn't end up using. Once I'm happy with the way that everything is looking, I'm going to start building it. I should have said back when we were doing the sentiment, but I'll do it now because the video's not over. The reason that I chose to white heat emboss on black is, again, another way to tie in that black outline and help it to look much more cohesive. So I am gluing my little nest behind my wreath, and then I am going to glue in this little extra piece. Now, you might wonder, like, Kelly, why do you need this little extra piece? The reason I chose to put the little extra piece there is to give the bottom a little bit more of a balance, because I'm going to add this nest and the bird to like the left center. And so I wanted to have enough of the leaves showing that it did look like a balanced center focal point. For my focal point, I decided to pop it up on some foam tape. I chose to just use foam tape instead of cutting multiples of, each of the dies, because they're stacked on top of each other. So that kind of becomes a little bit of a logistics nightmare. So I just chose to use the foam tape. I'm going to adhere the birdie right into its little nest. And then I realized his head was hanging off and his head needed a little piece of foam tape. So I'm just going to put that on the end of my scissors and then just tuck that in behind. I do peel off the release paper on both sides beforehand, so I don't have to worry about trying to get it off, and I know that it's adhered to the card. Originally, my intention was to put the sentiment in the top right-hand corner, but I actually ended up liking it in underneath the bird, and so that's where I chose to put it. So now we have that beautiful black outline, the darker colored bird, and then the sentiment that are all working really nicely together. I did add some shimmers. In the case of the wing, I added them in like that feather motion. For the flowers, I just gave them all a good old coat of shimmer. You know how I love the glitters. So I got glitters in the background with the perfect pearls, and then glitters on the flowers. And then I'm going to do some white highlights on the bird, again, just with like a flicking motion with the pen. If you don't put down a ton of pressure, the pen will skip, and that's exactly what I'm going for. So I just let the pen skip as it wanted to, and then I also tied in the stamping with those white highlights on the die by adding some white highlights to the center. And then this is the newest Pearls release. It's called Pacific Northwest, and I used the lightest kind of like pale corally orange color to offset the wreath, and then that's it. That's the whole card. So I hope that you guys found something interesting. I hope that you will give this a try to get more looks out of your stamps and dies by using them together. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.